Welcome to Roosevelt's first virtual cook-along fundraiser to raise money for RU students, calling it Cooking Together for a Cause. This special summer event is led by Robert Morris Experiential College at Roosevelt University, Culinary Masters, Rachel Murphy, Assistant Teaching Professor, and Brad Hindsley, Executive Chef and Assistant Professor. I'm Jessica Mueller, Associate Director of Alumni Engagement, and your MC for the evening. Aside from taste testing, I will show you some close-up shots of the chefs and their cooking tips and tricks. Christy Kotek, the Director of Alumni Engagement, is also on the call, so feel free to chat with her tonight. Thank you, Christy, for joining us. Tonight, the chefs will lead you through a delicious apple pie cookie, followed by a shrimp and pasta dish. I always love when meals start with desserts. Thank you to our amazing culinary experts, Chefs Rachel and Brad, for donating their time and talent to this worthy cause. Gifts of any size tonight have a lasting impact on Roosevelt students, wherever their education takes them. One of the reasons we are here tonight is to support student success through one of Roosevelt's mission-driven funds. The Stronger Tuition Grant supports one-time tuition grants for students facing temporary hardships. The Black Student Equity Fund supports the success of Black students and promotes equity in education through scholarships, programming, and campus events. The Student Emergency Assistance Fund gives students the immediate essential expenses grants to pay for such things like rent and bills. More information on these funds can be found at the link in the chat function that will be up in a minute. So welcome tonight to nearly 50 households of students, alumni, faculty and staff, and friends who are joining us. I hope you are all ready for the tasty treats in store for you tonight. Thank you very much for your generosity thus far in raising funds for our students to return to campus safely and securely. So far, we've raised almost $700 towards these 3 student emergency funds and hope to raise even more as the night goes on. A special shout out to our first-time donors as well. We appreciate you making this commitment to Roosevelt University. We will be recording the evening, and it will be available on our Lifelong Laker blog. I'd also ask that everybody use the chat function to ask questions to the chef that will either be answered as we go through the night or at the end with our Ask the Chef Q&A. Okay, so grab your recipes and let's get cooking. Welcome to Chefs Murphy and Hindsley. Take it away.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Chef Brad Hindsley. I'm with the Roosevelt University Culinary Program, and this is Chef Rachel Murphy. Thank you for joining us this evening. We've got 2 really great recipes to show you. Cooking is our passion, and we've missed it. We've missed teaching. We've missed some of our students who are on this Zoom tonight. So hi, students. Hi, alumni. I know some of you are out there. But we're very excited to show you a few tips and a few recipes along the way this evening. I just want to tell you a little bit more about myself because I am an alumni of Robert Morris University. I graduated from the culinary program back in 2008, got my MBA from Robert Morris University as well, and have been teaching with the program ever since. While we are both new to Roosevelt University, when the 2 schools integrated into one this past spring, I've been teaching our culinary students at Robert Morris for many years. I've been our executive chef for the last 5 years and have owned and operated my own business for the last 12 years as a personal chef, owning restaurants and catering company. So this is, food is my passion. I found that teaching is also a passion of mine. And because of that, the students are my life. So anything that you can give tonight towards any of these funds is greatly appreciated. It's going to go to some very deserving students. And so we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And I'd like to introduce Chef Rachel, and she's going to get us started tonight. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, so I'm Chef Rachel. I am also a graduate of Robert Morris University with their culinary program, and then in 2019 I finished my master's degree as well with Robert Morris. So I'm really excited to be here cooking for some great causes. I've been part of baking since I was in high school. I worked at a bakery as my high school job, and kind of worked the counter. But as I went into culinary school, they kind of accepted me and let me help a little bit more in that. So I've been a part of the industry for a while. Large bakeries as a pastry chef, but it's also nice because you get to dive into other ends and kind of work with marketing and other things. So today we're going to do an apple pie cookie. So we are going to start with our filling portion. So what we have here is I sliced my apple. So what I did is I peeled it and I just went right around the core to create basically a square around it. And we're going to do a small dice on this. We're going to fill our cookies, but you want to have multiple little pieces of apple filling inside your cookie as it bakes.
So we know some of you are cooking along with us this evening, so we are going to try and go slow. But if you have any questions along the way, type them in the comment section. Jessica, who is our camera person, is going to answer or ask any questions as they come up. If you have any general culinary questions, let's save those until the end. But if you're cooking along with us and you're not quite sure what it is we're doing, please ask those questions and we'll try and answer them as we go. Go ahead and keep going. You know, I like to talk.
All right, so for our apples, I'm going to cut this down the middle, one of my quarters of it. And then just make some small dices out of this. I don't know if you want to focus on this one.
So one of the first things that we teach in our culinary program is knife skills. And so this is a classic stick cut turned into a dice cut. These apples are going to get cooked down a little bit further and incorporated into Chef Rachel's cookies. But this is, culinary 101. This is something that you're going to see if you do take our program within the first couple of weeks of starting.
So if you want to as well, if you want to start getting your pan warm, because this is going to go directly in the pan afterwards. And really with these, the apple filling that we're doing, we're really cooking it just to get the flavor into the apples and kind of create a little bit of a caramel sauce with it. So we want to get this portion started so it can cool and we can come back and use it to fill our cookie dough. Right, so if you guys are caught up, I am adding in some flour, brown sugar, and butter, along with the cinnamon in my pan, so it's all the other ingredients listed for our filling. I just want to get the butter to melt down a little bit. And we're just going to look to dissolve our sugar and flour together. And as you get your apples cut, you can add it into your pan. And this will only take a couple minutes. It's a fast filling. So you're looking to have the apples just have a little bit of a crunch to it. You don't want to cook it all the way through to where it's almost like applesauce. So you just kind of want to melt it down. I'll have the camera come back up so you guys can see how the sauce consistency is.
Chef Rachel, why Granny Smith apple? Why did you choose that particular apple?
So I like Granny Smith apples because it holds up better as you bake. It doesn't continue breaking down. Some of the apples and fruits that you use have a little bit more water content in it. So you just kind of want to watch what you're cooking with. There are certain apples you should use for certain recipes or flavors that you might want.
And why can't we just throw these apples right into the batter? Why do we have to?
As I kind of mentioned before, you're getting a little bit more of that cinnamon butter caramel that you're adding and kind of infusing into the apples as they cook down. So these that I have in the pan are just about ready. So I'm kind of looking for the sugar. You can kind of see in between the apples, it's kind of looking thick like it should be a caramel sauce. And that's what I'm looking for because it dissolves all the sugar granules so you won't have crunchy sugar on the inside and it won't have to melt down as it bakes.
before we go any further, were there any questions? And if you have any, you can type them in. For those that are cooking along, were there any questions?
Did you use the whole stick in the pan of butter?
No, there is a half tablespoon. So there should be a separate section that has all your filling ingredients on the recipe sheet. The stick of butter will go in with, the larger amount goes in with our cookie dough mix.
So can you just run through the quantities of things that are in there? You have 1 apple diced.
So I have 1 apple diced. I have a half tablespoon of butter, 2 tablespoons of flour, and then I believe it's a teaspoon of cinnamon. Or sorry, a half teaspoon of cinnamon. And yeah, that's everything in here.
Are all the ingredients added to the pan to the sauce?
Yes,
Could you use a non-stick pan?
absolutely. I've been using nonstick when I make these at home.
And how much butter did you use for this part?
Half tablespoon.
So before we incorporate this into the cookies, we're going to let it cool, right?
You're gonna let it cool. So by the time, if you move it off your burner, once it's done cooking, you can have it off to the side on the countertop cooling down. By the time you finish making the cookie dough batter and get your sheet pan ready, the apples should be cool enough. It's fine if they're down to room temperature. They don't have to be ice cold going in. You still want the apples hot so when it goes into the cookie dough, it doesn't soften the butter before it bakes.
And a trick you can do too is, to cool them down faster, remove them from the pan into a separate dish. And that'll help, because they're going to carry over cook in this pan. The pan is still hot, so removing them into a separate dish will help to cool them down. So if we're all ready, we're going to move on to the next step.
All right, so we're going to start with the cookie batter. So in here, I just want to double check I'm writing amounts of ingredients. You have a
Chef Rachel, was the sugar added to the apple mix?
The brown sugar, you have a tablespoon plus a teaspoon is in here. Good. Okay, so I have back to the butter. You want to have that at room temperature. If you have cold butter, it's not going to break down as you start mixing. It's going to leave these butter chunks, so you're just going to have a butter chunk cookie dough, which when it bakes, you're going to have weird kind of splotches where it'll kind of pull off to the side because your butter's not combining correctly with the rest of your ingredients, which is really important about evenly combining as you are baking any kind of ingredient. You want to make sure it's all evenly dispersed throughout the entire batter. The bottom of your bowl has a whole bunch of butter and sugar stuck to the bottom of it at the end. You want to make sure back in the beginning you went and scraped the bottom every single time because you want to get everything combined, otherwise it kind of stays clumpy as you try to batter. So as long as that and your shortening are at room temperature,
What's the quantities that you have?
it's a quarter cup of each, quarter cup of shortening and a quarter cup of butter. To that, I'm going to add a half cup of granulated sugar and a quarter cup of brown sugar.
So when you're making cookies, the sugar acts as a moisture to the cookie itself. It might be a dry ingredient. A lot of people think, well, it's not wet. Why is it not considered a dry ingredient when we mix our dry ingredients? It's because the purpose of sugar in most baked items is to add moisture. That sugar caramelizes, and so it adds color to our baked goods. So when you're making cookies specifically, the ratio of white sugar to brown sugar is going to affect the texture of the finished product of the cookies. So if you add more white sugar, Chef Rachel, what's that going to do?
The white sugar is going to add a little bit more browning to make it crisper. Compared to the brown sugar, usually there's a little bit more moisture in that, so it adds a little bit more spread, which is usually why you see the combination.
So if you're making chocolate chip cookies, for instance, and you really like soft and chewy cookies like me, I play with those ratios. So if a recipe calls for a total of 2 cups of sugar, for instance, I play with those ratios. So if I want a more softer, chewier cookie, I might do 1.5 cups of brown sugar and 1/2 cup of white sugar. If you want a crispier, crunchier cookie like Chef Rachel prefers, we go back and forth on this. She's a crunchy cookie person, I'm a soft cookie person. It's okay, I don't judge her and I don't judge other crispy cookie people. But you're going to do more white sugar than you are brown sugar. There's more moisture content in the brown sugar because of the added molasses that we're back into. So what does this look like now? Just explain it to her.
So this is completely combined. It kind of looks a little granulated because there's a lot of sugar that you added into that. But it should be smooth, creamy, stuck to the side of your bowls. If you need to, kind of notice I went through with a rubber spatula and scrape the bottom of it. Especially if you're using the KitchenAid mixers, it has that dimple in the bottom, so a lot of ingredients will get stuck down there. So you want to make sure after pretty much every addition that you do for this method, you go back and you scrape the bottom of your bowl and make sure everything gets combined back together.
Is there a difference between using light brown sugar versus dark brown sugar?
Yeah, there is. It's actually the amount of molasses that they add into sugar. So you can make your own dark brown sugar if you run out at home, if you have granulated sugar and a bottle of molasses. And so it's really just the proportions of how much you add to each one that makes a little bit different. So if you have that dark brown sugar, you might get a little bit more spread, a little bit more of that caramel flavor into it, because that's how the brown sugar tastes with the molasses in it.
The only difference that because my dad just made chocolate chip cookies and he bought dark brown sugar over the weekend. And the only difference that I notice is it is a darker, richer flavor. Like Chef Rachel said, it's more caramely, but it does, because there's more moisture, it is going to make it softer.
And the same thing I didn't mention about the butter and shortening combo, because you don't always see that in cookies, is that with the shortening, you'll kind of notice as it bakes, it'll hold its shape a little bit better, because all fats have different amount of heat that it'll accept before it starts melting. So butter has a lower temperature where it'll start melting versus the shortening will hang on a little bit better. So you might see that combination with like frostings and things like that to help, especially when it's warm, kind of hold it a little bit better before it starts to soften or kind of melt off the side of your cake. But that's kind of having that same idea in a cookie dough. It's going to hold it a little bit better. So adding to your butter, shortening, brown sugar, and regular sugar, we're going to add 1 egg, whole egg into it. And then your ½ teaspoon of vanilla. And then same thing, you'll start mixing again. And then you'll want to make sure that you scrape the bottom of your bowl with it just to make sure that you have all your ingredients combined. Whenever you add eggs into your base, so like this has a lot of sugar in it, you want to make sure it keeps moving. The sugar will start to cook the egg a little bit. So if you just kind of let it sit there for a while, especially if you make like cream bases, it'll start to kind of look like scrambled eggs after a while. So you just want to make sure that it's combined as you're working with it. Usually it doesn't take very long to combine, but you do have to scrape it a bit to get it all even.
So while Chef Rachel continues on, and you can either interrupt me or do so. Yeah. I just wanted to talk a little bit, and I'll continue to talk about our culinary program over the course of the evening. Our culinary program, when it was at Robert Morris, is nearly 17 years old. So we've got some longevity in the city of Chicago of training up-and-coming chefs who have gone on to do some really great things, not only in the city of Chicago's culinary scene, but in the suburbs and around the country and even around the world. So I know we have some alumni culinary students. Shout out to you, you're doing great things. And our program is a really intensive program because we want to make sure the students are going to be successful. So it's not just about teaching them how to cut and dice things or how to saute or how to make cookies. It's also making sure that their resume is developed enough so when they graduate, they can actually get a job, right? We heard a lot from students in the past that, you know, they've got this great education, but they can't get a job. So we really wanted to make some changes to that. So what are you doing now?
So I'm going to have my dry ingredients. So I have them all skilled out together. So I have the 1 cup plus 6 tablespoons of all-purpose flour, 3/4 teaspoon of baking powder, and just a pinch of salt. You don't need a ton of it unless you're a salt lover. Go nuts. But you're going to add that directly into your sugar and egg mixture. And this part, you just want to be really careful. This isn't something you want to overmix. The creaming method is super simple because once you see everything combined, it's done. You can take it off the mixer, you stop spinning it around. Unlike bread, if you guys were making bread during quarantine, having to go down that path, that likes to get mixed a little bit more because flour has this thing called gluten in it, and so the gluten strands will get really strong and really tight the more you agitate it. So this one, you just want to make sure it stirs. It'll keep the cookie dough a lot more tender. So I'm going to go back and start stirring all of those ingredients in, and then you want to stop and scrape the bowl too during that.
So in a nutshell, don't overmix your cookies. Right?
You don't see flour, you're done.
Right. So part of our program is we have a very intensive internship program where students do 180 hours of experiential learning outside of our kitchen classrooms. So students will go out into restaurants, catering companies, might work with other personal chefs, country clubs, run the gamut of locations, and they get real life experience. On top of it, we have a pop-up restaurant that students will take part in twice before they graduate with a bachelor's degree. So once as a sophomore and once as a junior or senior. So they get to work in 2 actual restaurants where the students get to create the restaurant themselves. So they come up with the menu, the concept, the theme, and they can put that on their resume that they actually created 2 different restaurant concepts and helps develop 2 restaurants. On top of lots of other experiences that we offer our students. So that's the heart and key of our program.
And if you don't have a professional mixer,
if you have a handheld mixer, that's totally fine. I usually use that at home instead of letting this out of the cabinet all the time. So if you have one of those hand feeders, I use it at home. If you want to mix by hand, go for it. It's a good workout for your arms. So that's always good. So I just have the last little bit to fold in here because it's mostly together, but I want to make sure I get everything off the bottom of the bowl because that's stuck. All right, and pastry is always important. We like to make sure everything's added in. So this is what your dough looks like. Because after a while, if you think about how much butter and sugar and stuff you're buying, it gets really expensive. So you want to make sure that you're adding, everything gets scraped down, everything gets mixed in as you're working with your dough. So now comes the fun part. We are going to start assembling our cookies. So your apples should be pretty much cooled. You should have your dough ready. Is there any questions so far? Stuck on anything? All right, so this works pretty well. My hands are pretty hot today, so if you have warm hands and you're working with this dough, I usually pop it in the freezer for a couple minutes once it's, you get your cookies on the sheet pan. It'll help because otherwise my hands will keep melting the butter more and more, and you don't want that when it goes into the oven. So what I have here ready is my sheet pan. I threw down some parchment paper so it comes up really easily.
What if they don't have parchment paper?
You can go straight on the sheet pan as well. If you want to just very lightly spray it with some pan spray, it'll come up pretty easily with that as well.
What about wax paper?
Wax paper does not do well in the oven. That will melt down and kind of glue itself to your sheet pan, so you want to steer away from that one. Wax paper is better for storage because it helps keep all that moisture in your baked products. So you'll see a lot of parchment paper, like when you get your boxes of donuts, that's really helped to preserve it a little bit better.
it is also very flammable.
Parchment paper?
Wax paper.
Wax paper, yeah.
So keep it away from your flame.
Both of them are, yes.
So is parchment paper.
Make sure your burners are off if you're working by your stove.
Can they put foil down?
You can. I don't usually do it. It'll change your temperature and how it cooks a little bit, so it'll radiate some more heat. So I would adjust your temperature in your oven, maybe drop it down about probably about 20 degrees or so, 25. And that's the thing when you start baking cookies, you kind of got to know your oven, and sometimes your shelves are different temperatures. So usually the top is the hottest because the heat will rise up there, and if you have it on the very bottom, especially your rack is all the way down there, your bottoms will burn if you don't kind of watch it and shift it through your oven space. So a lot of times I kind of rotate through the shelves if I'm at home baking, just to make sure I get all the different temperatures. Because I know the top of my oven when I was baking yesterday went a lot faster than down lower. It'll help kind of get the top around. So for these cookies, I have my oven preset to 350. When I go and bake those, But otherwise, we can start assembling with the cookie dough batter. If you don't have, I have an ice cream scoop, so this is about just over a tablespoon. It's a tablespoon and a half. You can add a little bit extra. You can kind of eyeball it. Sometimes I add extra dough as I start the scooping process. If you don't have a scoop, you can use tablespoons. You just want to make sure it's as even as possible as you go through and scoop your dough. And then I have my spoon so I can add a little bit of my apple as I go through. So you might want to come closer on this part. So with my scoop, I used a flat scoop, so I just went up the side of the bowl. You are going to scoop it out. So I just use my hands on this. There's a variety of ways I've seen people do stuffed cookies. It's kind of like filling like an empanada or something like that, where I'm going to flatten it out. Now I'm just going to add, probably this is a teaspoon sized spoon. It's probably about half that I filled up with apples. And then you're going to pinch it. So all your fillings in there. If it kind of oozes out some of your like caramel sauce from the pan, that's totally fine. But I'm just going to pinch it so it's closed. You can kind of roll it a little bit more. And then I have my container. So we have cinnamon sugar mixture in here. If you like more cinnamon in it, you can change it out. You can add more into it. You can add nutmeg. Your cinnamon sugar mix is kind of something that you can create yourself too. This kind of makes it a little bit more like a snickerdoodle, adds more cinnamon for the apple pie feeling of it. But you can drop it in here. I like putting it in bowls and containers because then I can resave it for future kind of rolls and sift out any of the cookie dough if it's still left in here. Okay, so that would be your finished cookie. So you're going to keep scooping that pattern. I'll keep going so you guys can see it. But as you keep making cookies, you'll kind of notice that you want to space it out. So I'll have a pattern where I'll put a cookie on each corner, one in the middle, and follow that same pattern down the pan. So I'll probably get 8 or so cookies on this sheet pan, just to make sure it's all even and they don't run together and make a whole sheet pan worth of apple pie cookies.
Chef Rachel, what are you rolling that in?
Cinnamon sugar. So that is about a half, I believe it was a half cup to 2 tablespoons of cinnamon. If you want to add more, you can add more.
This one says 3/4 cup sugar and.
Is it 3/4? I changed my sizing yesterday when I baked it at home.
3/4
That's why.
teaspoon cinnamon.
So you can do this. You can do a couple at a time too, so that way you're not just rolling one cookie each time you're going. Okay, and then if you want to do other stuffed cookies, you can still use this cookie dough recipe for other things, or if you want to use different filling. So if you want to do like a nut butter, so you can use like Nutella or almond butter, something like that. If you stick your container of your nut butters into the refrigerator, you can spoon them out and kind of start shaping them once they sit in the refrigerator for a while. And then you would do the same thing. You want to keep the filling cold though before it goes into your dough, and then bake it right away. So you can have your hazelnut filled or peanut butter, and then same thing. You can roll it in different things. You can roll it in sprinkles instead. You can add a different spice into your mix if you want to add cardamom in there. Kind of have endless options.
So as you wrap up your recipe, we're going to start to get set up for the next recipe. So if you're still rolling cookies, go ahead and continue to roll cookies. If you have any final questions on this particular process, feel free to ask them now in the comments section, and Chef Rachel or I can answer them. But I'm going to start to set up for our pasta dish. So if you're ready for that, great. Continue rolling cookies. We'll get started on that in just a few minutes. But if you have a question, now would be a good time. Rachel, do you have some cookies already done to show our viewers?
I have a pan that I baked a little bit earlier. These are gonna slide a little bit. With the parchment paper, they'll slide right off, as you can tell. These are your cookies when you're done. You can see some of them cracked open, and that's okay. Those are probably the ones that had a little bit extra apple to it, so it'll crack a little bit more. But if you do that, again, if it's not perfectly round, that's okay too. There's tricks that you can kind of roll it a little bit more, or stick it in the fridge, and kind of reshape it if you want to get it perfectly round. Otherwise, these are apple pie cookies.
Does anybody have any final questions on cookies? If Rachel's still here, she's not going anywhere.
And you could put ice cream between, like a a la mode.
Oh, of course.
Oh, absolutely. Ice cream sandwich.
Ice cream sandwich, vanilla ice cream, or like a pralines ice cream would be great. Yeah.
That's nuts to it.
I do have one change to my recipe. I was at the grocery store yesterday when I went shopping. The chives looked terrible, so I am substituting green onions, which are cousin to the chives. So I just want to let you know, if you have chives, continue to use it, but know that you can use green onions in this dish as well. I know there were some questions in advance, perhaps. What if you don't like shrimp or seafood, or like me, I have an allergy? Can you use other types of protein? The answer is yes. The only difference when you're making this tonight, if you're say using chicken, make sure you cut it up in bite-sized pieces. You can use pork loin and do like little pieces of pork in there, or ham. You can do, if you do like seafood but just not shrimp, little bay scallops would be great in there. So you can do other types of protein, whatever you prefer. Just make sure they are bite-sized pieces. And you're going to cook those, and we're starting to cook our protein first. So if you are using chicken or other types of protein, just know you're going to cook yours a little bit longer in the beginning than what I do with the shrimp. So I have all of our ingredients already pre-measured. I've got 1 cup of cherry tomatoes that I've cut in half. You can use grape tomatoes if you've got really fresh, delicious tomatoes from your garden. Just dice those up; those work great as well. I've got some feta cheese. I'm going to use about a half a cup of feta cheese already crumbled. You can use goat cheese would be great in this, or even like a manchego cheese would be delicious as well. I've got 1 cup of heavy cream, some oil, salt, and pepper. I've got our 10 shrimp that I still need to remove the shell on, and I've got 2 ears of fresh sweet corn. So I wanted to talk to you first about the shrimp. And I'm wearing gloves just because of my shrimp allergy. So the shrimp that I got have already been deveined. So what does that mean? Devein is the digestive tract of the shrimp itself. So it's where all their waste goes. And so it runs along the back of the shrimp. So it runs right here on the shrimp. I can just, you're fine with this. It just runs along the back from the head down to the tail. And what I typically do when I want to remove that vein is I just take a pair of kitchen shears and I just snip right underneath the shell all the way back to the tail. And then I can pull out that vein. And then we're going to take the shell off. Now, ideally, you buy them already deveined. You can even buy them already shelled, but don't buy cooked shrimp. That's not going to work out for you because the shrimp are just going to continue to cook in the pan and they'll get tough. Also, I take the tail off of these too because when you have a pasta dish, you don't want to fumble with like having to pick the shrimp up and remove the tail. The only time I leave the tail on a shrimp is if it's like shrimp cocktail, where they have to pick it up with their fingers anyway. But if it's a dish like pasta where they're intended to use a fork with, don't make your guests or your family fumble with taking tails off the shrimp. Unless you want them to work for their food, then go ahead and totally do that. Okay? So I just have a few more to go. Does anybody have any questions so far? One of the things that we teach our students is to mise en place. Mise en place is a very fancy French term that translates to everything in its place. So really what we mean by mise en place is getting everything measured out, everything cut up, and ready to go. That's what Chef Rachel meant when she kept saying that she has her ingredients scaled up. It means the same thing. It just means that when we start the cooking process, we don't have to worry about our shrimp burning while we're continuing to cut our vegetables. So I'm just going to slice our scallions, and you can leave them whole, which I'm going to. We only need 2 tablespoons. Chives, again, just do a quick chop on them. You can do larger pieces or smaller pieses, it's up to you. And then we'll use a little bit more for a garnish. I really like that sweet onion flavor that the green onions and chives add to it. Red onions would be great in here as well. The last thing that we need of our ingredients is 2 ears of fresh sweet corn. Perfect this time of year. I know where my family lives in Indiana. All the farmers are coming to market with their sweet corn, and it's delicious. So I've shucked it to take the silk out, and I'm going to cut it off its the cob. What I like to do is put it, I just have a cake pan, you can use a bowl. I just like to contain the kernels when they fall. I don't know if you've ever done this before, where you cut them on a cutting board and the kernels just go everywhere. So this kind of keeps it contained. A sharp knife helps with that as well. And all of your corn is going to stay in your pan. And I did get a little on the cutting board, but it's not a tremendous amount.
Can you use frozen corn?
Yeah, absolutely. I would recommend frozen corn over canned corn, although if you have canned corn, that's fine too. You need I would say there's about 2 cups, maybe 1.5 cups of corn from 2 ears. So you can absolutely use frozen corn. So now we're ready to go. At this point, you want to put your pasta in pasta water. Whatever kind of pasta you're using, it doesn't matter. I'm going to be using some fettuccine pasta, and we did this from one of our suppliers for our culinary program. And this is a fresh pasta, so my pasta is only going to take 2 minutes to cook. But chances most people don't have fresh pasta just laying around in the refrigerator. So if you are using dried pasta, whether it's fettuccine, elbow pasta, shells, whatever, drop that into your boiling water right now. If your water's not boiling yet, that's fine. You can make the sauce. The sauce will hold nicely until your water comes up to a boil and your pasta's cooked. So don't freak out. This is a really forgiving sauce. Okay?
How do you test your pasta?
I taste it. With fresh pasta, it's really easy. If you can buy fresh tortellini would be great in this. Fresh tortellini in the refrigerated section of the grocery store. When you're cooking pasta like that, when it floats, it's done. And that only takes, like I said, 2 or 3 minutes. So I'm going to add some olive oil to the pan. This is a method of cooking called sauteing. So sauteing is when we add just enough oil to the bottom of the pan to prevent our food from sticking, which is different than pan frying, where we're using the oil to cook. So when we pan fry, we have a lot more oil. So you want your oil hot when you're sauteing. If you are adding any type of meat to a cold pan, it's going to stick. So you want the oil really, really hot. And what's going to happen is it's going to start to shimmer. So oil is kind of got some viscosity to it. But when the oil is hot enough, it's going to be almost as runny as water. And then it's going to start to smoke too. You see smoke kind of building off the top of the pan. You want a super hot pan with this, so we're going to add our shrimp. And that's the sound that you want, okay? And we're just going to cook these for about a minute. If you're cooking with chicken or any other type of protein, seafood, all seafood's going to cook about the same rate. But if you're cooking with chicken, you're going to need to cook yours just a little bit longer. Just follow along, and you have the recipe. It's a really simple recipe to follow. The next thing I'm going to add, just as the shrimp start to turn pink, I'm going to add in the corn and our cherry tomatoes. You want to make sure you don't overcook your shrimp. Overcooked shrimp are kind of rubbery and tough. So we're going to add just a little more salt. I like to tell my students to layer your flavor because if you just wait till the end of season, all you're going to taste is salt. So add salt and pepper every step of the way. Add your shrimp, season it. Add your vegetables, season it. And if I've got any students on who are listening, what is the one thing that I always tell you when I taste your food? It needs more salt. Salt is something that we add to food to enhance the natural flavors of our food itself. So we're going to just cook this. The tomatoes are starting to wilt a little bit. And to this pan, now I'm going to add in 1 cup of heavy cream. That's going to deglaze the pan. Deglazing the pan happens when you add a cold liquid to a hot pan. All these little bits of flavor that's stuck on the bottom of the pan are going to release themselves. We're going to turn our heat down to about medium to medium low. And we want to let this simmer until it thickens. We're going to reduce it until it reduces down to about maybe 2/3 to a half a cup of liquid. And that's going to slowly thicken that sauce. So to this, we're going to add our green onions. Let that reduce. And then right at the end, we'll add in our feta cheese.
About how long does it take to reduce?
Depending on the heat in your pan, I would say it might take, 3-4 minutes. It's not going to take long. Yeah. Do we have any questions so far? Don't be afraid of seasoning, or don't be afraid of salt. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump back. I've got some pasta water. It's at a roaring boil.
We have a question.
What's the question?
Can you talk about different types of salt when cooking table sea salt?
Absolutely. I will answer that question in just a second. To our pasta water, I am going to add just a little bit of salt. Pasta is a starch just like potatoes are, and so when they cook, they absorb the liquid they cook in, so we want to make sure that the liquid is flavorful. So I added just a little salt. Now salt, in most restaurants tend to use primarily kosher salt in their cooking. Primarily, it just seasons better, I think, as opposed to like table salt. Sea salt is great. You can get sea salt with many different minerals that have different flavors to it. It really is a preference to you. I use a lot of sea salt as finishing salt, so I'll put them on a dish right at the end so that I add some really nice color to it, or a really interesting flavor, or even if you get some really big flaky pieces, some nice crunch. But I prefer kosher salt. It's easier to grab with your hands too. I think it seasons better than an iodized table salt does. Any other questions?
There's a comment, fond. Maybe that's an inside joke.
Fond. F-O-N-D?
Yes.
Yeah, that's those little bits on the bottom of your pan are called fonds. F-O-N-D-S. So who said that?
Mike Story?
Okay. Hi, Mike. So yes, you're absolutely right. That's the exact word for it. So when we're deglazing, we are removing all of those fonds off the bottom of our pan. And those are all flavored. We don't want to lose that. So if you want to bring the camera just a little bit closer and see how our sauce is thickened up really nicely. It's really kind of encapsulating our shrimp and our corn and tomatoes really nicely. I'm going to add in about a half a cup of feta cheese. I'll save a little bit more for the top of the pasta. And we're going to shut the heat off at this point. The pasta or the sauce is going to melt that cheese really nicely. And even if you get some chunks left in there, that's perfectly fine as well. And so our pasta is just about cooked.
We have a question. Is it okay if it looks oily?
If it looks oily, yeah, that's fine. You probably added too much oil to your pan in the beginning, which is totally fine. Don't freak out about it. If you don't want the oil, you can take a piece of sandwich bread and just kind of like dab it on top of your sauce, and that'll absorb any residual oil. Okay, but once you add your pasta, the pasta will also absorb some of that extra oil. So that don't worry about that. So Jessica asked me, how do I know when my pasta's done? And I just taste it. I don't throw it against the wall. I don't have this really fancy trick to tell you when it's done just by looking at it. I really just taste the piece. You want it al dente, which means it's going to have a little bit of a chew to it. This pasta is cooked perfectly. As I make a mess. So we're going to add this pasta directly to our sauce. Now I still have some of that pasta water back there. When I mix this together, if the sauce makes the pasta too thick, that pasta water is going to be great to thin this pasta down. So if you add too much pasta to this, and it just is a really thick, dry pasta, then add some of that pasta water to this pan, and that's going to thin it down and really make a nice, well-made sauce. So this is, and I'll plate this. This is what our finished pasta looks like. And we're going to take some of the pasta, take some of that nice shrimp, tomatoes, get some of this really delicious corn on top, feta cheese. And then just as a garnish, I always like to tell my students, never bring me a plate unless it's got a garnish. We want it to look pretty because we eat with our eyes first. We're going to top it with some scallions and just a sprinkling of some feta cheese on top. And this is our pasta with shrimp, corn, and tomatoes. And you know what a perfect wine for this is going to be a Sauvignon Blanc. So that was my wines pick for today. This is a Chateau Saint Michel. Really great winery. It's one of those wineries that you can't go wrong with. So if you're not sure which label to buy, you're not sure what type of wine to get, Chateau Saint Michel is a good middle of the road. It's moderately priced, and they have really decent wines. I chose a Sauvignon Blanc because it's a really crisp summer wine. It's got a lot of acidity to it. That acid is going to cut through our creamy pasta sauce and cut through the cheese, and it will complement the acidity of the tomatoes as well. So Chardonnay would also go well with this if you're more of a sweet wine drinker. I would do a Riesling. Would be a good choice for this pasta as well. So, any questions?
So feel free to finish your dishes, break some bread, and ask some questions here. Any burning questions you have for chefs?
Or just like moderately heated questions. They don't have to be burning. Or I can just stand here and act like I'm watching you eat. Hopefully you're eating now.
Was it okay to use feta crumbles?
Yeah, that's what I did. I already bought organic feta crumbles. You can buy the block of feta cheese and crumble it yourself, whatever you prefer.
What's your favorite dish to make?
For me, I've been making, it's my question for Chef Rachel.
Both of you can answer, yeah.
I've been making paella a lot. Paella is a Spanish rice dish. It uses the pilaf method, which means you put everything together and you cover it and let it cook in the oven or on the stovetop. You don't stir it. But it has really great seafood and chicken and chorizo sausage. And, my friends love it. We have paella nights around the pool, and it's really delicious. What's your favorite?
I would say I like doing a lot of pulled pork or like smoking pulled pork and brisket and whatnot, and then I'll make my own barbecue sauce with it too. So the last couple times, I've been doing a strawberry barbecue sauce on top of the pulled pork, and kind of have a really good sandwich with some coleslaw. And that's pretty much it.
What do you think one of the hardest meals to make is, or when you're teaching, what's one of the harder meals?
One of the most technically sound dishes that we stress our students is risotto, which is a rice dish, but it's completely opposite than paella. Risotto is an Italian rice dish which uses a short grain rice, which is high in starch. Where paella or Mexican rice or just plain white rice that you might cook as a side dish, you put the liquid in and you cover it and you let it cook. Risotto, you're going to slowly incorporate the liquid into the rice while you stir constantly, slowly coaxing that starch out of the rice and making it a dish. So risotto is something that we teach in multiple classes because it is very technically sound. I feel a lot of restaurants don't make risotto the right way or make it well. And so one of the things that when we talk to our advisory board, one of the things we got is students need to know how to make risotto. What about dessert?
For pastry, there's probably a couple things, just because a lot of people walk in saying they don't like pastry, so we have to change the whole mindset to start the class. But I would say when we start getting into mousses or things that use a hot sugar sauce, adding it to buttercream or folding in for a chocolate mousse, sometimes just getting that balance, because there's a little bit of a temperature difference that you have to look for, so you don't create chocolate chips in your chocolate mousse as you're making that, to kind of get the right balance. But I would say sometimes with students, they're just scared of baking in general, which is not that scary once you kind of understand what you're doing. But that would be kind of the biggest thing. Pastry. Your favorite pastry?
Pastry is not, I was a pastry chef for a year or 2 years at a country club. I can do desserts. I can't do desserts like Chef Rachel can. But I would say cookies, I love making cookies. It's one of my favorite things to eat. I'll take a cookie over a piece of cake. So I would say cookies for sure is something that I enjoy. You're going to get a shot of finished dishes and wine.
Which country club did you work at?
I worked at a country club in Lakeside, Michigan, which is near Three Oaks, or Union Pier, if you're familiar with the area, called Chicken Meat Country Club. I worked there 2008, 2009, 2010, and 2011.
One of the participants said the apple pie cookies are delicious.
Oh,
Yay,
already
awesome.
finished cookies, yay.
And I think when I made it at home, those were gone in a day, if it made it through the day.
Did everybody have fun tonight?
What kitchen item tool can you not live without?
Tongs. Why is that funny?
I would say for cooking, tongs, absolutely. And then baking, I always have rubber spatulas. I have a zillion of them.
Yeah, rubber spatulas. Tongs are good. They're good for stirring, grabbing, picking, turning things up. They're just outside of a knife. I mean, you can't do anything in a kitchen without a knife. But I would say tongs is my favorite tool.
It's a second-hand figure.
Yeah.
If you are making larger quantities of I'm assuming the main course here, do you just double everything or triple everything, or do you reduce something?
No, I would just multiply it as needed. So if you're doubling it, double every ingredient in there. Make it in a bigger pan, of course. Just scale appropriately. What about cookies if they want to be?
Cookies, same thing. You just want to make sure if you're going to double the recipe, just times everything by 2 all the way down. You probably have some extra cinnamon sugar. If you have extra apple filling, I didn't forget that one. I've been making crepes at home where you throw it in your pancakes, you make cinnamon rolls, kind of add that as part of your filling for it, and use up what you have. But otherwise, everything, as long as you double it and scale it up, will work perfectly.
Now, some baking recipes, this is the question I'm asking. You can't double them and they turn out. Why is that?
It's just the proportions of how large the quantities are. So there's a balance that it has to have, which is, I think, like I was saying before, the hardest part about pastry, people are scared of it because it's all about the proportions of it. So as you're following a recipe, it's very technical in that. If you add too much one ingredient, it will throw it way off. So I've added too much sugar, I'd like an extra quarter cup or something into it, and your cookies spread and turn into a weird chewy texture instead of a regular soft, crunchy edges, soft center of it. So watching that balance of how you split ingredients when it goes in. This is the same thing as measure twice, cut once. It's the same thing as scaling and baking. Measure once. Don't confuse the numbers.
Rita's a nice demonstration. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rita. Does anybody have any other questions before we turn it back over to our fearless leader, Jessica? If anybody wants to come clean up,
You're
come on over.
There's some food.
Well, keep the questions coming if you'd like. But I do want to say thank you so much for sharing your evening with us. And we really hope you enjoyed your home-cooked meal led by these culinary experts. A big round of applause for the chefs, Rachel and Brad, for sharing the knowledge and expertise with us. So thank you.
Thank you.
And just a reminder, our students do need your support in and outside of the classroom. So consider volunteering your time and talents and or donating your treasure by paying it forward, some of your success so that others may have the same success in their lives. You can learn more about alumni programming and opportunities and our benefits at a link I'll share in the chat box in a minute here. You can also connect with us through all the social media channels or through our email, which I did put in the chat box here. Send us your meals. I want to see how they turned out. And remember, if you haven't donated yet, any amount matters. We appreciate it from the bottom of our hearts. Or if you want to contribute more, please follow the link. That will be also in the giving or in the chat room here, or it's all the way at the top. So thank you again for joining us tonight, and bon appetit, and take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.